847 Imperial vessels processed monthly at Mordian Salvage Complex. Median worker lifespan, 127 shifts. Statistics are ritual here. Numbers are the only mercy the Imperium offers its children. From observation, Gantry 12 on Blackjaw Orbital, the battleship Throne's Vengeance lies open to the void like a dissected corpse. 1 kilometer of ruptured sanctums and scorched reliquaries stretches across the salvage cradle, its hull split wide to expose the mechanical organs within. 10,000 workers swarm across her flanks like antibodies devouring dead tissue, their cutting torches stitching bright arcs into the darkness. The task is simple: reduce memory to feedstock. All heroism ends as ingots, insulation, rations, and ash. This is how the Imperium digests its own history. The fleet fights, the fleet dies, the fleet returns to be consumed. Shipbreaking serves as the war machine's digestive tract, transforming heroic dead into anonymous materiel for tomorrow's battles. A broken cruiser yields sacred copper, void-hardened steel, consecrated plasteel, relic components. The ledgers count each kilogram, each rivet, each blessed bolt. They also count the cutters. Losses are priced into operational timetables like coolant and incense. The Salvage Codex governs this consumption through Byzantine classifications. Standard reclamation handles routine operations. Hazardous processing manages contaminated hulks. Then exists Classification 7 Theta, Special Disposal Protocol. The bureaucratic language spans 17 pages without explaining what makes certain vessels require special handling, or why casualty rates for 7 Theta operations exceed 90%. The Throne's Vengeance bears this designation, stamped in red wax across her processing orders. The morning shift horn sounds across Blackjaw's industrial sectors, but not on Imperial Standard Time. The tone emerges deep and resonant, timed by astronomical calculations rather than chronometers. New workers pause, confused by the irregular schedule. Veterans move automatically toward their assignments, understanding the fundamental rule. The machine prefers obedience to clarity. Salvage Team Kappa 7 receives their orders through the standard channels. Mixed classification crew, standard equipment allocation, routine processing assignment. The work orders specify preliminary cutting operations on the Throne's Vengeance's lower decks, beginning with sealed compartments that show no battle damage but remain locked under authorization codes predating the ship's destruction. These compartments require special disposal protocols for reasons the Codex does not explain. The shift horn fades, leaving only the industrial symphony of plasma cutters and heavy machinery. 10,000 workers begin another day of transforming the dead into the useful. They do not question the irregular timing or the sealed compartments. They work because work is survival, and survival is the only victory available. Before we follow Team Kappa 7 into the Throne's Vengeance's depths, we must examine the legal framework that governs their expenditure. The Salvage Codex holds the answers to why some ships are not broken but buried, and why the Horn obeys stars rather than clocks. The sealed compartments aboard the Throne's Vengeance exist because the law demands their existence. Behind every red wax seal lies a legal framework that transforms salvage from simple material recovery into systematic human expenditure. The Salvage Codex, 27 millennia of accumulated edicts, amendments, and bureaucratic refinements, governs not just the dismantling of ships, but the processing of souls. Legal archaeology reveals the Codex's origins in the Great Crusade's aftermath, when returning imperial fleets required systematic material recovery. Early regulations focused on efficiency, maximize yield, minimize waste, standardize procedures. The law assumed workers would survive to gain experience. 3,000 years of amendments tell a different story. The critical transformation occurred following the Hereticus incident of M39. Official records describe only catastrophic operational failure with systemic contamination effects aboard the battle barge Hereticus Prime. Casualty reports remained sealed under inquisitorial authority. The legal response was comprehensive. Amendment 7. Theta restructured the entire salvage industry around the principle that some knowledge requires burial rather than recovery. The amendment created 3 distinct classifications. Standard reclamation governs routine material recovery from conventionally damaged vessels. Workers retain basic labor protections, medical coverage, and death benefits. Hazardous processing applies to ships contaminated by warp exposure or Xenos influence, requiring enhanced safety protocols to compensate for increased risks. Special disposal protocol encompasses vessels requiring complete erasure rather than salvage. Under Classification 7 Theta, operations transfer entirely to Mechanicus custody. Workers become temporary assets rather than employees, losing all labor protections during assignment duration. The legal language is clinical. Personnel are reclassified as operational resources with defined parameters for duration of use, acceptable attrition rates, and disposal pathways. Rights become specifications. Lives become line items. The Mortality Indemnity Clause governs casualty compensation through circular logic designed to minimize Imperial liability. Families receive death benefits only when deaths are ruled within operational parameters. The parameters themselves remain classified as operational security, creating a legal framework where deaths can be retroactively justified by referencing standards that cannot be challenged or examined. If parameters are classified, so is grief. Economic mechanisms ensure worker compliance through systematic debt creation. Death benefits fund replacement training programs. Scrip advances flow through administratum bursaries, controlled by the same offices that certify operational parameters. The system feeds on its own casualties, generating larger benefit pools that create financial pressure for survivors to accept increasingly hazardous assignments. Recent amendments address information contamination among veteran workers. New provisions authorize medical intervention for personnel showing signs of operational stress syndrome. Persistent questioning of safety protocols, unauthorized record-keeping, or attempts to organize collective action. Treatment includes memory modification, personality adjustment, and cognitive restructuring. The law frames these procedures as medical necessity rather than punishment. The Codex anticipates worker mobility between classifications and monetizes it. Standard reclamation crews are routinely conscripted upward when quotas slip. Selection criteria focus on cognitive pliancy indices and contamination tolerances rather than survival probability. The words are clinical, the meaning practical. Choose those who will. Endure, obey, and forget. Understanding these legal frameworks becomes essential when examining how human resources are selected and processed through the salvage system. The law shapes not just working conditions, but the fundamental relationship between workers and their expendability. Before following Team Kappa 7 deeper into their assignment, we must examine how the Imperium identifies and classifies the flesh it feeds to its industrial machinery. The Codex requires bodies to justify its classifications. The Administratum provides them through systematic human resource processing that transforms desperate populations into operational assets. Medical sorting determines not just work assignment, but survival probability, creating a hierarchy of expendability disguised as occupational necessity. 5 tiers govern human deployment. Baseline classification covers standard physical resilience for routine hull work, with acceptable casualty rates of 12% per operational cycle. Chem-resistant personnel possess enhanced metabolic filtering for toxic atmosphere exposure, their scarred lungs capable of processing solvent fogs that would kill unmodified workers within minutes. Rad-tolerant classifications indicate genetic resistance to radiation-induced cellular breakdown, essential for reactor dismantling operations near sacred cores. Psych-stable workers undergo evaluation measuring resistance to mimetic contamination. exposure to symbols, texts, or architectural configurations that induce cognitive breakdown. The tests identify minds capable of witnessing forbidden knowledge while retaining operational functionality. Expendable priority classification governs single deployment operations where survival probability approaches 0. The euphemistic language masks systematic human sacrifice disguised as hazardous duty assignment. Recruitment pipelines feed these classifications through multiple channels. Failed guard conscripts arrive with basic military discipline but insufficient psychological conditioning for frontline service. Hive city surplus populations provide bulk baseline classification through mandatory labor conscription programs, presenting work as civic duty rather than death sentence. Penal labor transfers supply. Expendable priority classifications through judicial sentences, commuting execution to hazardous industrial service. Voluntary indenture contracts target desperate populations through debt relief programs exchanging labor obligations for immediate financial assistance. The contracts use careful language, voluntary service, hazard compensation, completion bonuses, that transforms systematic exploitation into apparent opportunity. Most signatories cannot read the mortality projections buried in appendix subsections. Medical sorting reveals deeper purposes beyond simple physical capability assessment. Genetic screening focuses on specific markers, resistance to memory modification, susceptibility to cognitive restructuring, compatibility with servitor conversion processes. The protocols identify not just who can survive the work, but who can be processed afterward without operational complications. Salvage team. Kappa 7 represents mixed classification composition, optimized for special disposal operations. Crew. Chief Harl bears baseline designation with elevated psychological stability ratings. His 14 successful operations demonstrating resistance to cognitive contamination. Cutter Prime. Sana holds chem-resistant classification. Her enhanced respiratory system allowing extended exposure to toxic atmospheres within sealed compartments. Rad Specialist Eosef's genetic markers indicate exceptional cellular resilience. His medical file noting anomalous recovery rates from typically fatal exposure levels. Tech Adept Malin maintains psych-stable classification. Her evaluation scores showing unusual capacity for selective amnesia regarding classified materials. Team Leader. Vex carries expendable priority designation, his presence indicating the true nature of their assignment parameters. The team's composition follows standard protocols for 7 Theta operations, diverse capabilities with acceptable loss parameters. Each member provides specialized resistance to different contamination forms, allowing operations to continue despite casualties. The classification system ensures replacement personnel with identical capabilities can be substituted without operational disruption. Understanding how these classified workers function within their daily operational environment reveals the mechanics of systematic human expenditure. The 16-hour shift cycle that governs their existence transforms human resources into industrial output through carefully orchestrated ritual and routine. The 16-hour cycle transforms human resources into industrial output through ritual disguised as routine. Team Kappa 7 assembles in Processing Bay 7 as the shift begins with the counting of souls, a head count that measures more than attendance. Servo skulls hover above the mustering line, recording biometric data, vocal stress patterns, and micro-expressions of dissent. Each worker confirms their classification and loyalty affirmation, while scanners analyze speech patterns for signs of cognitive contamination. Tool blessing follows the count, performed by Confessor Industrialis Vorn through litanies that sanctify plasma cutters while assessing worker dedication. The ritual requires proper grip demonstration, stance confirmation, and invocational responses. Workers who fumble prayers or show inadequate reverence face spiritual counseling sessions that function as loyalty evaluation, disguised as pastoral care. The blessing doubles as behavioral assessment, identifying potential dissidents before they enter hazardous areas. Shift timing reveals deeper purposes beyond operational efficiency. While standard work follows 16-hour rotations, critical operations commence at astronomically calculated moments determined by stellar positioning charts. Team Kappa 7 receives orders to begin sealed compartment breaching at 3:11 sidereal time, following celestial mechanics that predate their assignment. The irregular schedule serves multiple functions. Certain containment protocols require specific astronomical conditions, and memory modification procedures achieve optimal effectiveness during calculated stellar alignments. Quota systems create systematic pressure for safety protocol violation. Weekly tonnage targets increase by 3% regardless of operational complications, while safety equipment allocation remains static. Teams failing quotas lose medical supplies, food rations, and rest privileges. Success requires accepting elevated risk levels that gradually normalize extreme hazard exposure. The impossible mathematics force workers to choose between immediate danger and eventual punishment. Mandatory rest periods fill with educational sessions reviewing codex compliance rather than providing recuperation. Workers recite operational parameters, casualty acceptance rates, and reporting requirements for anomalous discoveries. The sessions reinforce that survival depends on following procedures regardless of apparent danger, and that individual judgment represents deviation from approved protocols. The overtime system reveals the economic mechanics underlying human expenditure. Additional compensation comes directly from death benefit pools of previous crews, creating financial incentives for accepting hazardous assignments. The legacy pool transforms yesterday's casualties into today's wage supplements, ensuring the system remains self-sustaining through systematic attrition. Workers volunteer for dangerous operations using payment funded by their predecessors' deaths. Understanding these daily mechanisms reveals how control operates through routine rather than obvious coercion. The surveillance apparatus monitoring this cycle serves purposes extending beyond productivity measurement, transforming workers from human resources into systematically processed assets. The surveillance apparatus monitoring team. Kappa 7's 16-hour cycle extends far beyond productivity measurement into systematic human processing. Salvage Overseer Grendel maintains authority over 17 teams through a hierarchy designed to distribute responsibility while concentrating control. His advancement required demonstrating operational flexibility, documented willingness to ignore safety protocols when quotas demanded expedience. The promotion system rewards those who justify casualties as operational necessity rather than preventable tragedy. Shift arbiters occupy the middle tier, monitoring individual performance through biometric tracking and behavioral analysis. Arbiter Kess oversees Team Kappa 7 through neural link surveillance recording stress responses, attention patterns, and subconscious reactions to authority commands. Her evaluation criteria include not just productivity metrics, but cognitive compliance indicators measuring worker resistance to dangerous orders. High compliance indicates successful conditioning. Low ratings trigger adjustment protocols. Lex mechanics represent the surveillance system's technological apex. Their augmented consciousness, monitoring thousands of workers simultaneously across multiple data streams. Lex Mechanic Thane processes conversation recordings, sleep pattern analyses, and social formation mapping to identify potential security risks before they manifest as operational problems. His cogitator arrays track not just individual behavior, but group dynamics, predicting collective action through statistical modeling of worker interactions. Advancement through the control hierarchy requires specific demonstrations of loyalty measured through worker expenditure rates. Supervisors must prove willingness to sacrifice subordinates for operational objectives, with promotion tied directly to casualty statistics justified through proper documentation. The system creates incentives for escalating risk acceptance, as career advancement depends on demonstrating indifference to human cost. Adjustment protocols govern responses to workers showing operational stress syndrome, persistent questioning of safety procedures, unauthorized record-keeping attempts, or social organizing behavior. Protocols begin with counseling sessions designed to identify resistance sources, followed by medical intervention if psychological pressure proves insufficient. Advanced cases require memory modification or personality restructuring to restore operational compliance. The confessor industrialis occupies a unique position, providing religious justification for systematic expendability through carefully crafted theological frameworks. Confessor industrialis Vorn conducts daily blessing rituals, sanctifying both work and workers, transforming potential martyrdom into spiritual opportunity. His sermons emphasize the sacred nature of industrial sacrifice, framing worker deaths as offerings to the Omnissiah rather than preventable casualties. The surveillance network tracks everything except actual safety violations. Monitoring systems record worker conversations, physiological responses, and social interactions with exceptional precision, while systematically ignoring equipment failures, procedural violations, and hazardous condition reports. This selective blindness serves the system's true purpose, identifying workers who accumulate too much operational knowledge rather than preventing accidents. Within Team Kappa 7, this scrutiny operates constantly. Harl receives productivity commendations while his questioning patterns trigger discrete monitoring flags. Sena's authorization bypasses earn advancement recommendations. Iosef's radiation exposure levels are cataloged for servitor conversion compatibility rather than medical intervention. Malin's psychological stability ratings determine her assignment to increasingly classified operations. Understanding how this control apparatus operates through systematic observation reveals the economic extraction systems that ensure worker compliance through debt creation and resource manipulation, transforming surveillance into profit. The surveillance apparatus enables economic extraction mechanisms that transform worker compliance into systematic profit through debt creation and resource manipulation. Company scrip replaces imperial currency within salvage complexes, creating closed economic systems where workers cannot accumulate transferable wealth. Harl's 14 operations earn credits usable only at company stores, medical facilities, and housing blocks, trapping his labor value within the industrial apparatus. Medical debt accumulates through mandatory health assessments that identify treatment needs while creating financial obligations. Sena's enhanced respiratory system requires specialized maintenance costing 40% of monthly earnings, paid through automatic scrip deductions. The treatments maintain operational capability while ensuring permanent indebtedness. Harl carries 3 cycles of arrears for a cauterized lung, interest compounding at 2% per shift. Housing costs extract additional value through tiered accommodation systems, linking safety to payment capacity. Basic dormitories provide minimal protection from industrial hazards, while premium quarters offer atmospheric filtering and radiation shielding. Iosef's genetic radiation resistance allows cheaper housing, but accumulated exposure creates medical expenses exceeding the savings. Black market economies emerge within these constraints, operated through supervisor networks extracting percentages from all transactions. Safety harnesses, unstamped filters, contraband rad salve, and clean protein paste change hands under observation of those paid to prevent it. Overseers take 20% as handling fees, arbiters another 5% for order assurance. Even Lex mechanics approve selectively, flagging vendors who fail to tithe data. Hazard insurance offers cruel illusion of protection. Workers purchase coverage against specific risks through complex premium structures that exclude deaths ruled within operational parameters. Since parameters remain classified and subject to retroactive redefinition, policies rarely pay out for fatalities. The insurance becomes another mechanism for extracting scrip without providing genuine security. The mortality lottery represents the system's most insidious mechanism. Death benefits from deceased workers fund competitive auctions where families bid against each other for safer assignments. The lottery creates artificial scarcity around survivable positions while generating revenue from desperate relatives. Winning buys survival for one at the cost of another's hazard. Team Kappa 7's names appear on bid slates they never see. Economic extraction extends beyond individual workers through family debt obligations persisting across generations. Children inherit parental medical debt, housing obligations, and insurance premiums, ensuring continuous population availability for hazardous operations. The system creates hereditary indenture disguised as economic opportunity. Combined medical costs, housing fees, equipment purchases, and insurance premiums consume 87% of Team Kappa 7's collective earnings, leaving minimal surplus for escape. Their economic entrapment ensures operational compliance while generating profit margins funding system expansion. Understanding these economic constraints reveals how religious and psychological frameworks maintain worker acceptance of systematic expendability through spiritual justification for material exploitation. Economic entrapment requires psychological justification to maintain worker compliance without constant coercion. The religious framework transforms systematic exploitation into spiritual opportunity through carefully constructed theological systems that reframe suffering as sacred duty. Confessor Industrialis Vorn conducts daily devotionals that sanctify human expenditure through doctrinal manipulation, disguised as pastoral care. Morning prayers begin with the litany of sacred sacrifice, where workers recite gratitude for hazardous assignments while requesting spiritual strength to endure operational mortality. The ritual transforms potential death into religious privilege, creating psychological frameworks that make martyrdom seem preferable to failure. Team Kappa 7 recites these prayers knowing their assignment parameters approach certain fatality. The theological contradiction at the system's heart requires constant reinforcement through cognitive dissonance management. Workers pray for the machine spirits of ships they are systematically destroying, creating psychological tension that demands religious resolution. Confessor Industrialis Vorn explains this paradox through the doctrine of sacred dissolution. Vessels achieve spiritual completion through proper dismantling, their machine spirits finding peace through reverent destruction. Daily devotional requirements include prayers for deceased vessels, litanies of gratitude for dangerous work, and confessions of insufficient dedication when quotas are missed. The spiritual framework transforms industrial accidents into divine will, equipment failures into tests of faith, and casualty rates into measures of spiritual worthiness. Workers who die following proper procedures achieve martyrdom. Survivors who violate safety protocols face spiritual counseling for insufficient faith. Spiritual counseling sessions function as compliance monitoring, disguised as pastoral care. Confessor Industrialis Vorn conducts private meetings with workers showing operational stress, using theological language to identify resistance sources while maintaining religious pretense. The sessions record psychological profiles under spiritual guidance exemptions, allowing surveillance data collection without triggering privacy protocols. Within Team Kappa 7, these frameworks operate with varying effectiveness. Harl maintains surface compliance while privately questioning doctrinal inconsistencies. Sana traces protective circles inside her gloves before each cut, a private ritual learned from a dead trainer whose name she refuses to forget aloud. Iosef demonstrates concerning theological curiosity, asking questions about machine spirit doctrine that suggest dangerous independent thinking. Malin represents optimal spiritual processing, her psychological stability reflecting successful integration of contradictory beliefs without cognitive breakdown. Her ability to simultaneously revere and destroy makes her valuable for operations requiring extended exposure to theological paradoxes. Vex's expendable priority classification exempts him from spiritual requirements, his expected mortality making psychological conditioning unnecessary. The religious system creates psychological dependency through daily ritual requirements that provide structure within an otherwise incomprehensible industrial apparatus. Workers who lose faith face not just spiritual crisis but practical survival challenges, as religious compliance determines access to community support networks and psychological coping mechanisms. Today's orders arrive during final benedictions. Transfer authorization to battle barge Hereticus Secundus. Classification 7 Theta. Immediate deployment. Confessor Industrialis. Vorn closes his black-bound missile, reserved for special disposal operations, and intones the breach litany in frequencies that vibrate through bone and steel, preparing their souls for what their minds must not remember. The Hereticus Secundus receives Team Kappa 7 through docking port 7 at precisely 3:11 sidereal time, stellar positioning optimal for containment operations disguised as routine salvage. The battle barge stretches 2 kilometers through salvage cradle Tertius, her hull bearing no conventional battle damage despite classification as combat loss. Sealed compartments deep within her core display Mechanicus authorization codes predating her last recorded transmission by 3 centuries. Standard breach protocols govern initial approach through corridors that smell of blessed oils and accumulated silence. Harl's atmospheric scanners detect normal oxygen-nitrogen mixtures with trace incense residue, suggesting recent habitation despite official decommission records. Cena's enhanced respiratory system registers no chemical hazards requiring specialized filtration. Iosef's radiation detectors remain silent, background levels safe throughout target compartments. The sealed section lies protected by blast doors bearing inquisitorial seals and access codes, requiring astronomical calculation for activation. Team orders specify complete structural removal rather than selective component recovery, indicating total erasure rather than material salvage. Plasma cutters position around the primary portal, while servo skulls record compliance with operating procedures that will prove inadequate for what waits beyond. Cutting operations commence with proper litanies for machine spirit appeasement. Sena's torch traces clean lines through blessed adamantium while maintaining devotional requirements. The metal parts like ceremonial fabric, revealing darkness that swallows illumination without reflection. Standard procedure requires immediate entry following successful breach, but atmospheric readings show impossible spatial dimensions extending beyond the ship's documented structure. The compartment contains architecture, violating fundamental principles. Corridors extend past physical boundaries, while walls display geometric patterns shifting under direct observation. Gravity flows in multiple directions simultaneously, creating spaces where floor and ceiling occupy identical planes. Team Kappa 7 enters following protocols while equipment registers readings. Their training teaches them to ignore. Catastrophic breach occurs during routine cutting on an interior bulkhead. Cena's plasma torch penetrates standard plating, revealing raw temporal distortion contained within. Time erupts outward like liquid lightning, aging flesh decades in seconds while rewinding others to previous states. Harl watches his hands wrinkle and smooth repeatedly as chronometers spin between past and future. Iosef's genetic. Resistance proves useless against temporal contamination. His cellular structure ages 40 years in moments, radiation tolerance irrelevant against time itself. Malin's psychological stability cracks as she witnesses causality breakdown, her mind struggling to process simultaneous past and future states. Vex's expendable priority classification proves prophetic, as temporal distortion reduces him to constituent elements across multiple time streams. Emergency protocols activate with mechanical precision. Blast doors seal pneumatically. trapping survivors within the anomaly while bulkheads isolate entire sections. Mechanicus recovery teams deploy from hidden staging areas, their immediate response indicating pre-positioned assets rather than emergency mobilization. Specialized temporal shielding protects recovery personnel from contamination affecting the workers. Purge protocols commence with systematic witness elimination through emergency medical treatment. Surviving workers receive immediate sedation while Lex mechanics begin data purification procedures. The operation reveals its true nature. Special disposal operations serve as containment missions for vessels carrying forbidden knowledge, with workers functioning as expendable detection systems in systematic erasure protocols. Recovery teams process temporal damaged survivors through medical stations focusing on memory extraction rather than healing. Confessor Industrialist Vorn administers final rites that double as cognitive restructuring preparation. The salvage operation was never about material recovery, but ensuring dangerous knowledge dies with those who witness it. Team Kappa 7's processing begins immediately. Harl and Sena receive neural modification while unconscious, their memories of temporal anomalies replaced with standard industrial accident reports. Iosef's cellular damage requires servitor conversion, his consciousness preserved only as operational muscle memory. Malin's psychological profile indicates adjustment protocol compatibility, her stability valuable for future classified operations requiring selective amnesia. The Hereticus Secundus returns to secure storage, her dangerous cargo contained through human sacrifice disguised as operational necessity. The medical station's processing team's Kappa 7 survivors operate with precision indicating extensive prior experience rather than emergency response. Lex Mechanic Thane oversees neural modification procedures through cogitator arrays designed specifically for memory extraction and replacement, their sophistication revealing systematic development over centuries of perfecting witness elimination. Engram shearing begins with the strongest memories. Temporal distortion becomes atmospheric hazard. Chronological breakdown transforms into structural collapse. Thane's attendants map each dangerous recollection to contamination indices, then pass them through catechism filters that grind forbidden knowledge into compliant narrative slurry. Plasma cutter malfunction, pressure oscillation, blessed equipment failure. Safe accidents thread into the empty neural seams where impossible truths once lived. Harl awakens with manufactured memories of routine industrial accident, his neural pathways showing surgical precision in memory replacement. Dangerous knowledge has been excised while preserving operational personality. Medical records documenting successful treatment for acute stress syndrome, with full cognitive recovery expected within standard parameters. Sena's enhanced respiratory system required specialized modification due to her unique physiology. Her hands remember the wrong geometry of that compartment. If hands remember, minds go hunting. Memory rerouting transforms her torch-cutting temporal anomalies into training hololith scenarios where factorum bulkheads yield as designed. The smell of scorched time becomes burnt lubricant, aging and unaging replaced by nosebleed and manufactured reprimand. The revelation emerges through medical file cross-references. Many salvage complex veterans are actually mind-wiped survivors of previous classification 7 Theta operations. Their experience comes not from accumulated knowledge, but from manufactured memories implanted during neural reconstruction. The system creates artificial expertise while ensuring no genuine understanding of classified operations develops within worker populations. Malin's psychological stability makes her valuable for repeated classified operations requiring selective amnesia. Her modification involves cognitive partitions, allowing temporary access to dangerous knowledge while ensuring automatic memory suppression following mission completion. She becomes reusable asset capable of witnessing forbidden phenomena without permanent contamination. The surveillance system that ignored safety violations now reveals its true purpose, identifying workers accumulating operational knowledge across multiple assignments. Behavioral monitoring tracks not productivity but information contamination, designed to catch story formation rather than unsafe practices. When patterns emerge, whispers aligning into cause and consequence, names acquiring weight, dangerous geometry of anecdote. Adjustment protocols descend like shutters. EOSF's cellular damage necessitates servitor conversion, consciousness reduced to operational muscle memory, while personality elements undergo systematic removal. The process preserves radiation expertise as reflex responses while eliminating human awareness that might question orders. His converted form will work alongside future teams, former colleagues unable to recognize what he once was. Understanding this memory management apparatus reveals the ultimate destination for workers deemed operationally compromised. Final processing ensures complete security while preserving valuable experience within safely controlled forms. Memory modification failures require final processing through servitor conversion, the endpoint of worker lifecycle management disguised as medical necessity. IOSF's cellular damage from temporal exposure necessitates immediate intervention, his consciousness classified as operationally compromised, requiring therapeutic lobotomization under Mechanicus protocols, developed through centuries of human resource optimization. The conversion process follows established medical procedures within specialized facilities beneath Blackjaw Orbital. Neural mapping identifies valuable cognitive patterns before personality extraction begins. IOSF's radiation expertise registers as preservable reflex responses, while his human awareness of temporal anomalies requires complete removal. Servo-surgeons isolate operational memories from personal identity, creating cognitive partitions that maintain technical competence without retaining dangerous context. Systematic reduction proceeds through documented stages. Emotional responses eliminated first, then creative thinking, finally self-awareness itself. What remains is operational muscle memory, technical knowledge, and programmed obedience responses. IOSF's enhanced radiation tolerance proves too valuable for disposal, his genetic markers preserved while consciousness undergoes replacement with basic operational programming, focused solely on hazard detection and component dismantling. Medical documentation frames conversion as treatment for acute cognitive contamination, requiring therapeutic intervention. Families receive notification of successful medical treatment with continued service, ensuring enhanced death benefits. The euphemistic language transforms systematic brain destruction into career advancement, while accounting systems reclassify death benefits as augmentation subsidies to maintain fiscal efficiency. Converted servitors work alongside current crews, their former colleagues unable to recognize what they once were through managed recognition patterns. IOSF Servitor operates detection equipment with inhuman precision, his eliminated fear responses and enhanced reflexes making him more effective than human counterparts. Memory modification ensures former team members register servitors as unfamiliar equipment rather than transformed humans. The servitor pipeline reveals broader Imperial resource philosophy. Consciousness represents inefficiency in systems requiring only functional capability. Personality, creativity, and independent thought undergo elimination through proper processing, achieving optimal utilization by preserving useful elements while discarding human complications. The Mechanicus creates perpetual assets from potential liabilities. Confessor Industrialis Vorn provides theological justification through the doctrine of sacred function, preaching that corrupted flesh achieves purification through mechanical integration. Servitorization becomes sacred. Offering rather than tragedy, bodies dedicated entirely to Imperial service without individual will complications. Within the salvage complex, servitors perform increasingly hazardous operations with perfect compliance, their presence allowing more dangerous assignments while maintaining plausible casualty statistics. Servitor losses register as equipment failure rather than personnel casualties, creating artificial safety improvements while expanding operational parameters. Understanding this final processing reveals how resistance emerges despite systematic control, and how underground networks attempt to preserve dangerous knowledge through unauthorized methods. Memory modification creates unintended consequences through human nature's resistance to complete erasure. Harl returns from medical treatment sketching impossible geometries during unsupervised moments, his conscious mind unable to recall the Hereticus Secundus incident while his hands remember forbidden architecture. Sena obsessively maintains her cutting torch, polishing away residue only she can sense from temporal contamination that officially never occurred. Underground networks emerge through careful information preservation disguised as routine maintenance activities. Workers hide documentation within equipment caches and medical supply containers, creating distributed archives that survive individual neural modification. Scratch logs carved into rivet seams encode casualty patterns, while prayer knots tied in cable looms record dates and names through bead count sequences. The resistance operates through shared materials rather than spoken words, dangerous truths preserved in collective memory patterns that individual processing cannot completely eliminate. Family networks extend resistance beyond workplace surveillance through unauthorized memorial practices. Hidden shrines containing personal effects, work assignments, and casualty details create parallel information systems documenting true operational costs rather than sanitized productivity reports. These memorial networks preserve names and circumstances that official records classify or eliminate entirely. The commissariat responds with overwhelming force designed to demonstrate futility rather than achieve surgical elimination. The Chronicle of the Unnamed, a collection of whispered survivor accounts from Classification 730 operations, resulted in complete sterilization of 3 HAB blocks. The mark of the shifting geometry, symbols drawn by workers exposed to non-Euclidean spaces, led to mass servitorization of entire shifts. Suspected information networks face complete population replacement, with worker cohorts transferred while replacement personnel undergo enhanced screening for resistance markers. Arbeit's involvement indicates classification of information preservation as potential heresy, requiring inquisitorial attention. Workers maintaining unauthorized records face interrogation under theological protocols, their resistance framed as doctrinal deviation rather than industrial safety concern. Religious justification transforms memory preservation into spiritual corruption, requiring purification through enhanced neural modification. The systematic irony emerges through careful analysis. Resistance ultimately serves the control apparatus it opposes. Underground networks become recruitment tools for identifying candidates requiring adjustment before they achieve operational security risks. The surveillance system monitoring productivity actually functions as resistance detection network, allowing preemptive intervention against dangerous knowledge accumulation. Malin observes these patterns through her cognitive partitions, understanding how suppression cycles perpetuate themselves. Dangerous memory creates whispered networks. Brutal suppression eliminates threats. New compliant workers replace the processed. The heresy of remembering becomes managed burn, preventing wildfire while identifying combustible elements for removal. Understanding how resistance serves systematic control reveals the broader economic functions that make human expenditure profitable within the salvage industry's true purposes beyond material recovery. The resistance networks unwittingly reveal the salvage industry's true economic function through their systematic suppression. What appears as institutional paranoia maps directly onto profit margins, where human expenditure generates superior returns to preservation. The apparent inefficiency of high casualty rates conceals optimized efficiency for the system's actual purposes: artifact disposal, population control, compliance testing, and servitor production. Economic analysis reveals 4 integrated revenue streams operating beneath material salvage operations. Dangerous artifact containment generates Mechanicus research contracts worth exponentially more than scrap metal recovery. Population control through systematic expenditure reduces hive city overcrowding while generating industrial output, solving demographic problems through profitable elimination rather than expensive relocation. Compliance technique development creates exportable methodologies sold to other imperial institutions requiring human resource management. Servitor production converts operational casualties into perpetual assets, eliminating wage obligations while preserving technical expertise. Death benefit systems function as sophisticated fraud mechanisms rather than worker protection. The mortality indemnity clause creates insurance pools funded by premiums while minimizing payouts through classified parameter manipulation. Families receive compensation only when deaths can be retroactively justified through sealed criteria, allowing systematic benefit denial while maintaining legal compliance. The circular funding structure ensures death benefits flow back into the system through housing, costs, medical debt, and mortality lottery participation. Servitorization represents the profit engine's optimization pinnacle. IOSEF's conversion eliminates wage obligations, medical expenses, and safety requirements while preserving his radiation expertise as programmed reflexes. Former workers return as equipment depreciated over operational cycles and insured as assets rather than personnel. Casualty statistics improve through reclassification of servitor losses as equipment failure rather than fatalities, unlocking safety incentive grants while expanding hazardous operation parameters. Medical harvesting adds secondary revenue through organ extraction, disguised as post-mortem examination. Enhanced genetic markers like IOSEF's radiation resistance create valuable biological resources for Mechanicus augmentation research, monetizing human casualties beyond their labor value. The classification system identifies profitable biological assets rather than work capability, creating parallel markets in human components. The mortality lottery transforms grief into auction mechanism, channeling benefit pools toward artificially scarce, safe assignments. Bidding wars extract maximum value from desperate families while maintaining hope, illusions that ensure continued participation. The system creates perpetual motion economics where death funds the machinery that produces more death. Insurance schemes generate pure profit through systematic exclusion. Hazard insurance collects premiums while denying claims for deaths within operational parameters. The parameters themselves classified and subject to retroactive redefinition. Adjusters collaborate with Lex mechanics to retrofit justifications after casualties occur, ensuring minimal payouts regardless of actual circumstances. This systematic cannibalism of human lives and memories operates as deliberate imperial policy rather than institutional failure. The salvage industry demonstrates controlled resource consumption, where dangerous knowledge and surplus populations undergo profitable elimination through industrial processing. Techniques developed for managing salvage workers, memory modification, systematic amnesia, compliance conditioning, export to other imperial institutions requiring human resource optimization. Understanding these economic mechanisms reveals how the salvage model applies throughout imperial civilization, transforming systematic consumption of history and humanity into sustainable governance policy. The salvage industry reveals itself not as anomaly, but as blueprint. What operates within Blackjaw Orbital's processing bays represents core imperial governance philosophy, systematic consumption of the past to fuel an unsustainable present. The techniques developed for managing dangerous knowledge through human expenditure export throughout imperial civilization, creating institutional frameworks dedicated to active regression disguised as preservation. Memory modification protocols perfected on salvage workers undergo systematic deployment across imperial institutions. Administratum archivists receive cognitive partitioning, allowing temporary access to dangerous records while ensuring automatic suppression following research completion. Military historians undergo selective amnesia regarding failed campaigns, their expertise preserved while eliminating knowledge that might inspire tactical innovation. Ecclesiarchy scholars studying forbidden texts receive neural modification, ensuring theological compliance despite exposure to heretical materials. The Mechanicus applies salvage methodologies to technological development, systematically destroying innovations that threaten established paradigms. Dangerous scientific discoveries undergo containment through researcher elimination rather than suppression, ensuring knowledge dies with those who develop it. The Imperium's apparent technological stagnation results from active regression policies, preventing advancement beyond approved parameters. Economic logic sustains this civilization-wide amnesia through profit mechanisms refined in the salvage yards. Erasure pays better than preservation. Mechanicus contracts for knowledge containment outbid the value of recovered insight. Servitorization converts potential dissidents into useful assets, transforming the cost of consciousness into the security of obedience. Insurance pools monetize institutional forgetting while funding further control techniques. The surveillance apparatus monitoring salvage operations provides template for broader imperial information control. Behavioral analysis, identifying dangerous knowledge accumulation, operates within administratum offices, military commands, and civilian populations. The system tracks not productivity, but information contamination, designed to prevent dangerous connections forming across institutional boundaries that might challenge established authority. Imperial education systems incorporate selective amnesia techniques, ensuring knowledge transmission without understanding development. Students learn procedures without context, facts without implications, skills without comprehension of their broader applications. The educational apparatus creates functional ignorance, maintaining operational capability while preventing dangerous synthesis that might lead to questioning. This systematic memory destruction creates institutional amnesia, ensuring each generation rediscovers identical problems without accessing previous solutions. The Imperium maintains stability through systematic forgetting, consuming its own history to prevent learning from accumulated failures. What appears as bureaucratic inefficiency conceals optimized efficiency for control rather than progress. The cultural cost compounds invisibly across millennia. A civilization that actively destroys its own memory cannot learn from its mistakes, condemned to repeat them endlessly. The grimdark reality of the 41st millennium emerges not just from war and suffering, but from the recognition that this colossal empire functions as a machine designed for perpetual profitable erosion of its own potential. Understanding these broader implications reveals how individual tragedy scales to civilizational suicide, where each day begins with systematic forgetting of the previous day's accumulated wisdom and horror. The morning shift horn sounds across Blackjaw Orbital at 3:11 sidereal time, its resonant tone calculated by the same astronomical mechanics that governed yesterday's forgotten operations. The deep note emerges tuned to constellations rather than clocks, an obedience to stellar positioning that transforms time itself into a sacrament of systematic forgetting. New workers assemble in Processing Bay 7 for the counting of souls, their enthusiasm and hope identical to their predecessors because the system ensures they cannot learn from previous failures. Salvage Team Epsilon. 12 receives their orders through standard channels. Mixed classification crew, standard equipment allocation, routine processing assignment on the battle barge Hereticus Tertius. The work orders specify preliminary cutting operations on sealed compartments bearing classification 7 Theta designation. The new workers do not recognize the patterns because recognition has been systematically eliminated from institutional memory through techniques perfected across millennia of human processing. Harl reports for duty with manufactured memories of successful industrial operations, his neural modifications ensuring he cannot recall the temporal anomalies that consumed Team Kappa 7. His hands sketch impossible geometries during unsupervised moments, muscle memory preserving what consciousness has been taught to forget. The sketches match patterns drawn by workers across centuries, identical responses to identical erasure procedures. Senna maintains her cutting torch with obsessive precision, polishing away residue only she can sense from contamination that officially never occurred. Her enhanced respiratory system processes blessed oils and accumulated silence within corridors that smell of forgotten horrors. She does not remember breathing time itself, but her lungs remember the taste of temporal distortion. Iosef Servitor operates detection equipment alongside the new crew, his eliminated consciousness preserving radiation expertise as programmed reflexes. Former colleagues register him as unfamiliar machinery rather than transformed human. Memory modification, ensuring they cannot recognize what they might become. His presence demonstrates the system's ultimate efficiency, converting problems into solutions through proper processing. The procedural creed for survival within this eternal cycle offers only the illusion of agency within a system designed to consume everything fed into it. Trust no memory. 4. Memories are manufactured to serve operational parameters. Question number order. For questions trigger adjustment protocols. Expect no rescue. For rescue represents system failure requiring correction. Remember no names. For names create dangerous connections between past and present. These rules provide psychological comfort while ensuring continued participation in systematic consumption. New hands copy the movements of those ahead as if recalling a choreography they never learned. The ritual has no teacher because the ritual is the teacher. Each gesture passed through generations of systematically processed workers who cannot remember why they perform these actions. The shift horn's echo fades into the void, carrying away the last traces of voices that will never be remembered. 10,000 workers begin another day of transforming the dead into the useful, their labor feeding a machine designed to consume its own history. The eternal shift continues, each day beginning with systematic forgetting of the previous day's accumulated wisdom and horror, ensuring the Imperium's perpetual consumption of its own potential through profitable human expenditure.